Welcome to the deep dive. We often talk about tech innovation, and today we're diving deep into a place where it's happening at an incredible pace, China. Specifically, their smart cities. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is. The scale of what they're doing with smart city tech is unlike anywhere else. I just finished this book, Smart Cities, China's Model of Success, by Eduardo Moreno L., and it's packed with details about this massive transformation.
We've got a copy here too. This deep dive is all about unpacking this book, getting to the core of how China is using data, tech, and a whole different approach to urban planning. We're going to give you the key insights in plain language. No jargon overload, I promise.
Exactly. No need to be a tech expert to follow along.
So where do we even start? This book is dense.
Well, Moreno makes a good point early on, something that underpins all this progress. Education. China has been investing heavily for years in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math.
Right. It's like they knew this tech wave was coming and prepared their workforce, and we're seeing the results. They're producing top-tier engineers and scientists.
And those universities, Tsinghua, Beijing, they're now global players, competing with the best institutions in the West.
Just a few decades ago, the landscape was so different. This shift has been remarkably fast.
Exactly. They've closed the gap incredibly quickly. And this flood of tech talent is powering their smart cities.
So we've got the talent, the investment, and then they create these smart cities. But what exactly does that mean? What are we talking about here?
Okay, so imagine a city where almost everything is connected. Traffic lights, energy grids, buildings, all talking to each other. And then you add AI, machine learning, and lightning-fast 5G networks. That's the essence of a Chinese smart city.
It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it's real.
Oh, it's very real. And happening right now in cities like Shenzhen and Hangzhou. They're turning these cities into giant real-world labs for testing and implementing all this technology.
Give me an example. Like, what problems are they solving with all this tech?
Well, take traffic. Imagine AI managing traffic flow, constantly optimizing it to reduce congestion. And then you've got smart energy grids that adjust usage based on real-time needs, cutting down on waste.
I've been to some of these cities. Even trash cans have sensors.
Exactly. It's about creating more efficient and sustainable cities, more livable for residents.
And doing it at a scale and speed that, frankly, we don't see in many other parts of the world.
The book makes that clear. This isn't just a few pilot projects. It's a coordinated effort across entire cities.
Okay, so now we've got all this data flowing around these smart cities. That raises a lot of questions about security and control. What's China doing in those areas?
Right. Cybersecurity is huge, especially as they build this massive digital economy. The book emphasizes this centralized approach to governance in China.
So if there's a threat, the government can react quickly and take action across the entire system.
Exactly. It gives them a lot of control and the ability to respond rapidly.
But that also raises some eyebrows, right? Especially when it comes to privacy.
Absolutely. The book gets into the debates around this model. Some argue that this level of control allows for effective security measures, but there are real concerns about surveillance and individual freedoms. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
And this centralized model seems to be a pattern. They've got these homegrown tech giants dominating the cloud computing space, too.
Right. Huawei Cloud, Alibaba Cloud.
Yeah.
They're giving the U.S. giants a run for their money.
And it's interesting how their approach to regulating all this tech is pretty different from, say, Europe, which has a lot of strict data privacy laws.
Yeah. The book contrasts that. It points out that in China, this looser regulatory framework has really allowed their tech sector to boom. But it also means less emphasis on individual data rights compared to the EU.
And again, it comes back to that question of transparency. How much oversight is there really in China's tech sector? It's something people are watching closely.
Definitely. There's a lot of scrutiny from the outside. But one thing's clear. China's not keeping this all to themselves. They're becoming increasingly influential globally. A lot of that's through partnerships with other countries.
Yeah, the book highlights the Belt and Road Initiative, their work with BRICS nations, Latin America. It's pretty far-reaching.
And they're often offering these cutting-edge technologies to developing nations. It can be a big draw for countries looking to jumpstart their own development.
So we've used the term smart city a lot, but let's define it. What exactly are we talking about when we say a city is smart?
The book gives a pretty clear definition. Basically, it's about integrating advanced tech into every part of a city's infrastructure. The goal? Better quality of life, smarter use of resources, and more sustainability.
So it's not just about having cool gadgets or apps, it's a much deeper integration of tech.
Yeah. Think of it like a nervous system for the city. Sensors, networks, data analysis. It's all about collecting data on how the city functions, and then using that data to make things run more smoothly.
And what are some of the concrete benefits that China's already seeing from this approach? I mean, why go through all this effort?
Well, the book outlines several key areas. First, sustainability. Smart grids are helping them integrate renewable energy. Intelligent traffic systems are reducing congestion and, as a result, air pollution.
Okay, so cleaner, more efficient cities. Makes sense. What else?
Public safety is another big one. With advanced surveillance and data analytics, they can monitor cities more effectively, predict potential threats, even respond to emergencies more efficiently.
Right. I mean, there are cameras everywhere in some of these cities. Facial recognition tech. It's pretty controversial.
Oh, absolutely. There are huge ethical debates around that level of surveillance.
Mm.
But in terms of how they're using it, the book also mentions things like early warning systems for natural disasters, making cities more resilient.
Okay, that's interesting. It's not just security, but using the data for disaster preparedness too.
Right. And then there's healthcare. Smart cities are helping them expand access to healthcare through things like telemedicine, remote patient monitoring.
So people in more remote areas can still get access to specialists without having to travel.
Exactly. And it allows for more preventative care, continuously monitoring health data, catching problems early on.
That makes sense. And then there's all the stuff about e-governance, making government services more accessible. I've used some of those apps myself.
Oh yeah, those are really slick. Paying bills, reporting issues. It's all streamlined through these digital platforms. And it creates more transparency, theoretically.
The book uses Shenzhen and Hangzhou as its kind of poster children for successful smart city implementation. What makes them stand out?
They've both done a really impressive job with their intelligent transport systems. Traffic flows much better there. And their e-governance platforms are super advanced. They're often seen as models for other cities, not just in China, but globally.
So it's not just about having the technology, but also using it effectively. Okay, so how does China's overall approach to smart cities compare to what we see in, say, the US or Europe?
Well, the book points out this key difference. China has a much more centralized model. The national government plays a huge role in setting the agenda, the standards, the funding.
Right, it's top down in many ways.
Exactly. Whereas in the West, it tends to be much more decentralized. Local governments have more autonomy to decide how they want to approach smart city development.
And we talked about sustainability being a big part of their agenda. Is that just a China thing, or is that a global trend in smart city development?
It's definitely a global trend, but the book points out that China has been particularly aggressive in incorporating those sustainable practices. It's a major focus for them. And those cities, Shenzhen, Hangzhou, they're leading the way.
And these public-private partnerships seem to be key, right? Having companies like Alibaba and Tencent working hand in hand with the government. Is that also common in other places?
It's definitely a growing trend globally, but again, in China, those partnerships are often on a massive scale. And the lines can get a bit blurred between government and private companies in terms of who's controlling what.
Right. It's very different from the more citizen-centric approach you see in some European smart cities, where the focus is more on bottom-up initiatives and involving residents directly.
Absolutely. The book makes that contrast. It's two very different philosophies in how you approach developing a smart city.
Okay, let's talk tech for a minute. The book identifies these core technologies that are driving everything. Can we break those down? What are we talking about here?
Sure. First, you've got data analytics. I mean, it's all about collecting and making sense of the mountains of data flowing through these cities. That's where AI comes in.
Right. So they're using AI to analyze this huge amount of data and make predictions about, well, everything.
Exactly. Traffic patterns, energy use, potential security threats, all of it. AI can help manage these complex systems in ways that humans simply couldn't.
And then there's the Internet of Things, which I think most people have heard of by now. But it's not just about having smart refrigerators, right? It's much bigger than that.
Way bigger. Think of it as the nervous system of a smart city. Every sensor, every camera, every connected device, they're all part of this massive network. And it's that network that allows for real-time monitoring and response.
Okay, so it's this web of interconnected devices constantly collecting and transmitting data, and AI sits on top of that, making sense of it all.
Exactly.
Okay, but who's making the decisions here? Where does the government fit into all of this? What are their strategies?
The Chinese government has a very clear, very strategic vision for all of this. It's laid out in their national policies, their 5-year plans. It's all about deeply integrating tech into urban development.
And those 5-year plans, those are like their roadmap.
Exactly. It's where they set their priorities, their goals,
Yeah.
and smart cities are a huge part of that.
So this isn't just happening organically. It's a very deliberate top-down approach.
Oh, yeah. It's very top-down. And they're not just saying, let's build some smart cities.
Yeah.
They're setting very specific guidelines and standards for how these cities should function.
And that probably helps with things like data security and making sure these systems work together seamlessly.
Exactly. And to figure out what works best, they're also very big on pilot projects. They'll choose a city, try out different technologies, see what works, and then roll out the successful solutions more broadly.
So they're learning as they go, making adjustments along the way.
Right. It's a very iterative process. And of course, all of this requires huge investments.
So where's the money coming from?
It's a mix. You've got government funding, obviously, but they're also really good at attracting private investment. Those public-private partnerships are key. And state-owned enterprises play a big role, too.
Okay, so we've got the national government setting the agenda, the funding. But who's actually doing the work on the ground? What are the roles of the different levels of government?
The central government is really focused on the big picture stuff. Policymaking, funding, setting those national standards, they're the ones pushing this forward.
And then the local governments are the ones actually having to implement it all.
Right. They take those national policies and have to figure out how to adapt them to their specific cities, their specific needs.
And they're probably also the ones dealing with all the headaches, right? Trying to integrate old systems with new ones.
Definitely. And they're the ones dealing directly with the citizens who are affected by all these changes.
So good communication is key, making sure residents are on board with all these changes.
Absolutely. And that central-local government relationship, that synergy, is really important. It's what makes this whole thing work.
So let's imagine we're a local government in China. We get this big policy document from the central government saying, go build a smart city. How do we actually put that into action? What does implementation look like?
It's a gradual process. They often start with these pilot projects. They'll test out different technologies, different approaches in a controlled environment.
So it's like a real-world experiment before they go all in.
Exactly. And they track everything very closely using key performance indicators.
Yeah.
Those are metrics that measure how well things are working. If a pilot project isn't hitting its targets, they'll adjust.
So it's about constantly evaluating and adapting.
Right. And they invest a lot in training people to manage these complex systems. Building that expertise is key.
So we've got the policies, the funding, the expertise, but it's still a huge undertaking. What are some of the biggest challenges they're facing?
Lots of challenges. On the tech side, integrating all these different systems can be a nightmare, getting them to talk to each other, dealing with legacy infrastructure.
Right. And then there are the social implications, like the digital divide. Not everyone has equal access to technology, so how do you make sure no one gets left behind?
Exactly. That's a big concern. And then there's the environmental impact of all this technology. They're trying to address that by integrating green technologies into their smart city models.
So it's not just about tech for tech's sake. It's about using it to create a better future.
That's the idea, at least.
Let's talk about the Internet of Things again, because that seems to be the backbone of all of this. Can you give some concrete examples of how it's being used in these smart cities?
Sure. Think about traffic management. They're using sensors to monitor traffic flow, adjust traffic light timings in real time to reduce congestion.
I've seen those systems in action. It's impressive how they can keep traffic moving.
And then you've got environmental monitoring. Sensors all over the city collecting data on air quality, water quality.
So they can identify pollution hotspots and take action.
Exactly. And on the energy side, smart meters are giving them a much more granular view of energy use, which helps them manage the grid more efficiently.
Right. And those smart buildings that can adjust lighting and temperature automatically based on occupancy, all IoT.
Right. But of course, all of this raises concerns about privacy. I mean, when you've got sensors everywhere, collecting data on everything, you need strong safeguards.
So what are they doing to address those concerns?
Well, they've got regulations and standards in place. Things like encryption, access controls. They're trying to build security into these systems from the ground up. But it's a constant challenge, especially with technology evolving so quickly.
So IoT gives you the data, but then you need something to make sense of all that data. That's where artificial intelligence comes in, right?
Exactly. AI is the brain behind all of this. It's what allows them to analyze those huge data sets and extract meaningful insights.
Okay, give me some examples. How is AI actually being used in these smart cities?
Well, we talked about traffic management. AI can analyze traffic patterns, predict congestion, even optimize traffic light timing in real time. It can also play a role in public safety, helping them analyze surveillance footage to identify potential threats.
Right, those facial recognition systems they're using.
Exactly. But it's not just security. AI is also being used in healthcare, helping doctors make diagnoses, personalized treatments. And in education, you've got AI-powered tutoring systems that can adapt to each student's needs.
It's pretty incredible when you think about the possibilities.
Oh, the potential is huge. But managing all that data is a challenge in itself.
And that's where big data analytics comes in, right? What does that mean, practically speaking?
Well, it's all about taking those massive data sets,
Mhm.
processing them, and turning them into actionable intelligence.
So not just collecting data for the sake of it, but actually using it to make better decisions.
Right, and they're using it for everything. Traffic management, like we talked about, but also public safety, healthcare, even things like predicting and responding to environmental issues.
Can you give me a specific example?
Sure. Imagine a city using real-time data to track air pollution levels. They can identify the sources of pollution, predict how it's going to spread, and then take steps to mitigate it.
That's pretty amazing. It's like having a real-time dashboard for the entire city.
Exactly. And to handle all that data, they need serious computing power. That's where cloud computing comes in.
So those big cloud platforms like Alibaba Cloud are really the infrastructure behind all of this.
Absolutely. The cloud gives them the storage capacity, the processing power. It's essential.
And it also allows them to integrate all those different data sources, right? Because a smart city isn't just about one system, it's about connecting everything.
Right. And the cloud makes that integration much easier. It also allows them to build those sophisticated e-governance platforms.
The ones that let you do everything online.
Exactly. And from a cost perspective, it makes a lot of sense for cities. Instead of having to build and maintain their own huge data centers, they can just tap into the cloud.
So we've got the cloud for storage and processing, but what about the physical infrastructure? The networks, the cables, the servers?
Right. It's a complex ecosystem. You need a robust network, both wired and wireless, to handle all that data transmission. And of course, you've got the data centers themselves.
And how do all those millions of IoT devices actually connect into this system?
Well, they're using a mix of wired and wireless connections, depending on the device and its location. And then there are all those sensors and actuators that collect the data and transmit it back to the central systems.
And this whole system has to be incredibly secure, right?
Absolutely. Cybersecurity is a top priority. They're using all the latest technologies, encryption, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and they're constantly monitoring for threats.
Because if someone were to hack into a smart city's systems, it could be disastrous.
Oh, yeah. The potential for damage is huge.
Okay, let's talk about how they actually gather all this data. What are the main sources?
It's a pretty diverse ecosystem. You've got all those IoT sensors we've talked about collecting data on everything from traffic flow to air quality, but they're also using GIS technology, those geographic information systems.
So they can map the data, see the spatial relationships.
Exactly, and they're getting a lot of data from mobile devices. People's smartphones are constantly transmitting location data, usage patterns.
Right, and they're using anonymized, aggregated data to understand things like traffic flows and population density.
Exactly. And they're even encouraging citizens to contribute data, reporting problems, providing feedback through apps and portals.
So it's a combination of purpose-built sensors, mobile data, citizen input, all feeding into this giant data pool. And then they have to store all of it.
Right. And with the amount of data they're collecting, they need huge storage capacity, and it has to be secure, reliable, and able to handle all those different types of data.
So what are they using?
They're mostly relying on cloud storage. It's just the most scalable and cost-effective option for managing these massive data sets. But they're also using edge computing in some cases. That's where you process the data closer to the source.
So for things that require really fast response times, you don't want to be sending data all the way back to a central cloud. You process it right there on the edge of the network.
Exactly. And they're even exploring blockchain technology for some applications.
To create that permanent tamper-proof record.
Right. Especially for sensitive data, that added level of security is important.
Okay, but collecting and storing data is just the first step. The real value comes from analyzing it.
Exactly. And in a smart city, a lot of that analysis has to happen in real time.
So not just looking at historical data, but reacting to things as they're happening.
Right. For example, traffic management.
Yeah.
To really optimize traffic flow, you need to be constantly analyzing data and adjusting traffic light timings in real time. Or think about emergency response. Having access to real-time data can be life-saving.
But doing all that processing in real time with all that sensitive data, that must raise some big security concerns.
Oh, absolutely. Security is a constant challenge. And it's not just about protecting the data from hackers. It's also about making sure it's being used responsibly, ethically.
That brings us back to that central question of privacy. All of this amazing technology, all this data, it could be used in some pretty scary ways if it falls into the wrong hands.
No doubt. And the book really dives into those challenges.
So what are the biggest concerns people have?
Well, with so much data being collected, there's always the risk of misuse.
Mm.
And the potential for surveillance is huge. I mean, they're already using facial recognition tech, tracking people's movements. It's pretty Orwellian.
Right. It's something a lot of people are uncomfortable with.
And then there's the question of who owns this data, who controls it. In China, it's often not clear where the lines are between government and private companies.
So what are they doing to address these concerns?
Well, they're trying to build in safeguards. Things like data anonymization, encryption, making sure the data is being used for its intended purpose and nothing more. But it's a constant balancing act.
Because on the one hand, you want to use this data to make cities better, safer, more efficient.
Right. But you also have to protect people's privacy and their freedoms. It's a tough challenge.
One thing that struck me about China's approach is how they're integrating different sectors of the city. It's not just about transportation or energy and isolation. It's about connecting everything.
Right. It's about thinking of the city as a single, interconnected organism.
Can you give me an example of how this integration is working in practice?
Sure. Imagine a smart grid that can talk to the transportation system. So when there's a lot of traffic congestion, the grid can adjust energy distribution to reduce strain on the system. Or think about healthcare and environmental monitoring.
So if there's a spike in respiratory illnesses in a certain area, they can check the air quality data and see if there's a correlation.
Exactly. And then they can take steps to address the problem.
So it's about breaking down those silos and creating a more holistic view of the city.
Right. And it's all made possible by the technology we've been talking about. The IoT, big data, AI, they're the enablers of this integration.
And Shenzhen is a prime example of this, right? They've really gone all in on this smart city vision.
Oh, yeah. The book describes Shenzhen as a kind of living laboratory for smart city innovation. They're trying things that no one else is doing.
And it's not just talk, they're actually making it happen.
They're investing heavily in research and development, deploying cutting-edge technologies across the entire city. And they've got a really comprehensive plan that guides everything they're doing.
The book mentions their smart city plan.
Right. It outlines their vision for integrating data and technology across all aspects of the city. It's pretty ambitious.
And they're already seeing results, right?
Oh, yeah. Their transportation system is one of the most efficient in the world. Their e-government platform is top-notch. And they're using AI and big data to address everything from public safety to healthcare.
It's interesting how they've created this smart cities sensor grid system, collecting data from all over the city.
Right. It's all about building a comprehensive picture of what's happening in the city in real time. And they're using that data to make better decisions, to optimize everything.
It sounds like a very data-centric approach.
It definitely is. And that brings with it some challenges.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, centralizing all that data gives the government a lot of power. It raises concerns about privacy and surveillance.
Right. It's that trade-off we keep coming back to.
Exactly. And then there are the technical challenges, making sure all those different systems can talk to each other, dealing with data quality issues.
It sounds incredibly complex.
It is. But they've also been very good at partnering with tech giants like Baidu, Alibaba, Huawei.
So they're tapping into that expertise, those resources.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that the government still maintains pretty tight control over the data. They're very careful about who has access to what.
Because ultimately, the ethical considerations are huge.
Absolutely. They have to find the right balance between using technology for good while also protecting people's privacy and freedoms. It's a constant challenge.
So Shenzhen is one example, but it's not just happening there. The book talks about digital transformation happening across all sectors in China's smart cities.
Right. Think about transportation. They're deploying intelligent traffic systems everywhere, testing out autonomous vehicles.
And they've got some pretty ambitious national initiatives for healthcare and education, too.
Yeah, Healthy China 2030, Smart Education China. It's all about using technology to modernize those sectors.
And transparency seems to be a big theme. They're making a lot of urban data publicly available, right?
They are. They're creating these open data platforms that give citizens access to all sorts of information about their city. It's part of their effort to build trust and accountability.
And they're even experimenting with blockchain for some of this, right? To ensure the integrity of the data.
Exactly. It's still early days for blockchain, but it has a lot of potential in this space.
And they're also creating these platforms where citizens can give feedback, report problems, get involved in the decision-making process.
Right. Citizen engagement is becoming increasingly important.
But again, it comes back to that balance between transparency and privacy.
Exactly. They have to be careful about what data they make public, how they protect people's privacy. It's a sensitive issue.
Another thing the book emphasizes is the importance of feedback mechanisms.
Oh, yeah, that's crucial. They're constantly monitoring how these systems are working, collecting data on their impact, and then using that feedback to make improvements.
It's like a giant feedback loop, constantly iterating and refining.
Right. And it's not just about data. They're also actively soliciting feedback from citizens, through surveys, community meetings, online forums.
Because ultimately, it's about making cities that work for the people who live in them.
Exactly.
So we've talked about all these amazing advancements, but what about the people actually living in these smart cities? How have they reacted to all these changes?
Well, overall, the book suggests that people are pretty happy with the results. They see the improvements in their daily lives. Things like less traffic, better air quality, more efficient public services.
So there's a general sense of optimism.
Yeah, for the most part.
Okay.
And the government has done a good job of communicating the benefits of these initiatives, getting people on board.
But it's not all sunshine and roses, right? There are still concerns.
Oh, absolutely. Privacy is still a huge issue, and there are worries about the potential for misuse of this technology, about increased surveillance.
Right. It's that classic dilemma of security versus freedom.
Exactly. And there's also the issue of the digital divide. Not everyone has equal access to technology, so how do you make sure everyone benefits from these advancements?
And then there's the question of jobs. As more things become automated, what happens to the people who used to do those jobs?
It's a valid concern.
So there are definitely challenges, even amidst all this progress.
Oh, yeah. But it's important to remember that this is still very much a work in progress.
Speaking of challenges, what are some of the other obstacles they're facing?
Well, integrating all these different systems is a huge one. It's one thing to have a smart traffic system. It's another thing to get it to talk to the energy grid, the public safety system.
Right, so it's not just about having the individual pieces, it's about getting them all to work together seamlessly.
Exactly. And then there's the human element. You need people who can manage these systems, who understand the technology. So capacity building is really important.
And then there are the economic challenges. Funding all of this is not cheap.
Definitely not. And they have to make sure the benefits are being distributed fairly.
So we talked about the importance of coordination between different levels of government. But what about within a single city? How do they get all the different departments to work together effectively?
Well, communication is key. They're creating these centralized command centers where representatives from all the different departments can work together, share information, coordinate responses.
So it's like a central nervous system for the city.
Exactly. And they're using technology to their advantage. Things like GIS systems that give everyone a visual representation of the city, standardized data protocols that make it easier to share information.
So it's not just about meetings and phone calls, it's about having the right technological tools in place.
Right. And strong leadership is crucial. Someone who can set a clear vision and get everyone rowing in the same direction.
So we've talked a lot about technology, but it's really about using it to achieve specific goals. One of those goals is more efficient resource management, right?
Absolutely. They're using technology to optimize everything. Energy use, water use, waste management.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about those smart grids we talked about. They're using AI to balance energy supply and demand, to predict peaks in usage, to make sure there's always enough power to go around.
And that helps them integrate renewable energy sources more effectively.
Exactly.